Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel for my February wrap up. It's really funny because in January I was super proud of myself for making small TBRs and sticking to them and reading every single thing that I put on them. And so I did the same thing in February, but I was not as successful I was successful in sticking to my TBR, but I actually didn't get through my entire TBR. And that is just because February was a bit of a slower reading month for me, and there were lots of factors that went into that. So a couple of things, I watched a couple of TV shows in February, which if you've been following along for a long time, or especially if you are in Discord and you keep trying to convince me to watch something, you will know that I don't watch a lot of TV, and it's really, actually I've been watching 3 TV shows this month, which is like unprecedented for me. So I binge watched a Chinese animated TV show that was about an emperor and an empress who switched bodies, which I thought was great. It was really funny, really entertaining, but it sucked up like a portion of my time. I have been watching through Avatar: The Last Airbender with my family, so my husband and my 2 kids, and we have been watching a couple of episodes after supper every night, which has been great. I have never seen Avatar. I have seen Korra, which I really love, but I had never seen Avatar, so I'm excited to be watching that. And of course I have been watching The Last of Us as well, so on Sunday nights I've been watching that with my husband too. On top of that, I have been doing a lot of writing this month. I have been involved with like some fan fiction festivals that have deadlines and, works need to be in by a certain time. So I have been spending a lot of time doing that. And I've written about like 20 to 25,000 words in February as well. So that took up a chunk of time between writing it and then editing it. And then in some family news, my nephew, who is 2, was admitted to the hospital for a couple of days, and that was a bit of a stressful time. He is fine. He is back home. We are all happy that that is so. But that was a couple of stressful days where I didn't get a lot of reading done either. So in terms of reading, I still read a lot for, the average person, but I read less than I usually read and less than I had on my TBR. But I will get into that. I will review the books that I have read. There were 7 of them for February. And the books that I did read, I really ended up enjoying. I read some books that I really, really love in February, and I'm excited to talk about them. So we'll do the same thing as always. We'll just go through it in chronological order. I will mention the star ratings. So in February, I had 1, 2, 3, 4 5-star books, which is fantastic, 4 of 7. Then I had 1, 2, 3, 3.5-star books. So actually, it was a pretty, the month was distributed pretty evenly that way. So the 3.5-star books I still really liked. It's just that obviously they paled in comparison to those 5-star reads. So the very first book of the month was a reread for me, and this is actually a first time listen, but a second time through the book, and that is Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. So Jane Eyre, I read for the first time, I'm trying to think when I read it for the first time. I was definitely in university, but I didn't read it as a university selection. Like I didn't read it for a class, but that was just the time of my life when I did read it. It was a gift from my husband actually when we first started dating. So I imagine that I was around 19 when I read it for the first time, because that's when we met, is when I was just about to turn 20. So I probably read it when I was 20, because I think he gave it to me for my birthday the first year that we were together. So I read it for the first time when I was 20, and I really, really enjoyed it back then, but I didn't actually know what happened. I think the twist or the reveal in Jane Eyre, which for anyone who doesn't know is a Gothic classic, I didn't know what it was. And so the feelings and emotions that I had reading Jane Eyre for the first time, the relationships that I really enjoyed, what I wanted the ultimate outcome of the book to be, were a little bit different than they were when I read it for the second time, for 2 reasons, I guess. Because I had the benefit of hindsight, knowing what was coming and knowing what was going to happen, and I'm also older. So the things that I probably enjoyed in a romance were very different when I was 20 as opposed to 35. So it's, it was just a big difference in that way. And it was interesting. It was still absolutely a 5-star read. I love this. I think that the writing is excellent. The story flows really well. Charlotte Bronte knows how to create an atmosphere, which also goes for her sister Emily Bronte, who wrote Wuthering Heights. Also excellent at crafting that dark, gloomy, kind of creepy feeling as you're reading the book. There are passages of Jane Eyre that are genuinely scary to me. I mean, probably not to the average reader, but enough to like get me a little bit freaked out. So I really, really liked it. It's part of the Audible exclusive series, so it was one that I got for free. And it is narrated by an actress, but I don't remember who the actress is at the moment. I will pop it up on the screen because I think she did an excellent job. All of the books in that series on Audible that I have listened to have all been really, really well done. So if you are wanting to read or reread Jane Eyre, then I can most definitely recommend the audiobook experience. After I finished Jane Eyre, I wanted to read some romance because it was February and I like to slip a romance in there sometimes. And I had been in the city in St. John's and gone to the bookstore. And so I picked up a romance by an author that I really like, and that was Glitterland by Alexis Hall. So Alexis Hall has written a ton of romance novels, and I have enjoyed all the ones that I have read. So when I saw this one in the bookstore, I decided to grab it. This is kind of a sunshine grumpy romance. So we have a man who has been, I guess, like betrayed by life. He's suffering from a severe and persistent mental illness, and this has gotten in the way of many of his relationships. It has led to a lot of mistreatment by the people in his life. The friends in this book, I'm going to put it in quotes because I was mad. I did not see them as his friends, but the people who are in his life, I think, are really mean about his mental illness and the way that it impacts them, and they make it all about them and not about him and what he is suffering. But it was actually a really, I think, accurate portrayal of somebody who is living with a severe and persistent mental illness and how that can affect your life, how it can permeate into your relationships. And it was really sad, which is interesting because Alexis Hall is also really funny, and this book was also really funny, but his humor does kind of cross over on that like sad, bleak kind of scale where he's laughing at really dark things about life, but it did manage to pull a lot of laughs out of me. So that's one of our main characters, and then our other main character is a wannabe model who is like the brightest, sunshiniest human in existence, and they meet, I think, at a club and then hook up that night, and it turns into something more. The reason this got 3.5 stars because I really, really liked it. Like I said, I enjoy Alexis Hall's writing. I think he's really funny. His quips and his dialogue are always excellent. But one of the characters is from Essex, and Alexis Hall has written this in that dialect. And so everything that he says on the page is written out the way that it would sound if you were listening to him speak. And it really bothered me. I did not like it. I found that it took me out of the story, and I just did not enjoy it. Now, I read this with some friends on Discord because we all wanted to read a romance around Valentine's Day, and it didn't bother them as much. I think one person did the audiobook and one person read it physically like I did, and it didn't bother them to the same extent that it bothered me, so it may not bother you either. But on the whole, I still thought that it was an excellent romance. The characters were very easy to root for. It was fun to watch them get together and, you know, read through their trials as the book progressed. So overall, a good reading experience. It was just that part of the story kind of grabbed me out of my immersion pretty frequently. After that, we had The Trouble with Peace. So in December. In December, I read A Little Hatred. In January, I started The Trouble with Peace. And then in February, I finished it. And I really enjoyed it. I may as well talk about both of them together because I read The Trouble with Peace and The Wisdom of Crowds. The Wisdom of Crowds in February. I love them both. I believe The Wisdom of Crowds is now my favorite book in all of the First Law universe. I think I remember when it came out, and I was not that far in the series yet, and that year on BookTube, it was like at the end of the year roundups, everybody's favorite book was The Wisdom of Crowds. And so it got built up as things do, and I was wondering, is it going to live up to that hype? Am I going to like it as much as I like some of the other First Law books? Is it that much better? It's so great. It is an excellent trilogy ender. It is an excellent series ender. It's just a great book overall. The whole Age of Madness trilogy is Abercrombie writing at his best, in my opinion. There were characters that I loathed. Definitely, I hated characters, and in one character in particular in the Age of Madness trilogy more than I hated anyone in the original First Law. Even if arguably the things that he, now you know this character is a he, but the things that he did in the Age of Madness were probably objectively not as bad as the things that some characters did in the original First Law trilogy, I don't care. I hated him, and my hatred fueled me through a lot of the reading of these two books. But there were also characters that I loved, absolute favorite characters from First Law. Some of them carryover characters, and some of them new characters just for Age of Madness, and I loved it. My one disappointment is that I would have liked to see some of the characters that I loved from Sharp Ends show up in the Age of Madness, and I really hope that Abercrombie's not finished forever writing in the First Law world. I know that he's moving on to new things. I don't know, people who have been more well-versed in Abercrombie for a longer period of time than I have could maybe tell me if he's ever mentioned whether or not he would come back to the First Law, because I would really like to see some of those characters who showed up in Sharp Ends. I loved them so much. And that's, I know that might be like a little bit of an unpopular opinion, because Sharp Ends has a bit of a, I don't think it has like a bad reputation. I think people just tend to not like it as much as the main series, which I can understand, but I really loved it, and I would have loved to see those characters again. But on the whole, absolutely loved The Age of Madness. The Wisdom of Crowds was my favorite book of the month. I will be shocked if it is not near the top of my favorite books of the year, because I can't imagine reading too many books that are better than that. I guess we could find one or two, but I don't know. After those, I started a new series that was one of my most anticipated, or like series that I wanted to start in 2023, and that was The Natural History of Dragons. And obviously the first book is called A Natural History of Dragons. I gave this one 5 stars. I will say that with the understanding that I absolutely do not think this will be a 5-star series or book for everyone, but it hits on so many of the things that I love. This is a memoir, a series of memoirs written by Lady Trent, who is an elderly lady nearing the end of her life, who is looking back on her history of becoming a natural historian. She was a young girl who was always obsessed with dragons, growing up in a society that did not allow women to pursue intellectual hobbies, I guess. Like, they weren't allowed to be members of research colloquiums. They weren't allowed to study at the university in the same programs as their male counterparts. And she grew up in a time where she was kind of a trailblazer into the pursuit and the study of natural history. So this is looking back on her life and how she reached that point, how she became one of the forerunners of dragon research. So that in and of itself should tell you, if you have followed this channel for any amount of time, that it is automatically going to be the thing that appeals to me. I love natural history. I love evolutionary biology. I love female protagonists who are kind of outside the expected mold, and not necessarily in a like, I'm gonna be hyper-masculine kind of way. Not that I don't like characters like that. Like, I enjoy a good Mulan story as well, where, you know, the woman goes undercover and has to learn to sword fight and do all those like stereotypically masculine pursuits. But I also just like it when women are badasses for other reasons, specifically intellectual reasons. Lady Trent is funny and she is plucky, and I just love her. I have been doing this by audiobook, which is narrated by Kate Redding, I think is how I pronounce her name, the Wheel of Time lady. And I think she does an amazing job with these. I don't know how her Wheel of Time narration is, but her voice and the way that she delivers the story fits really well for this kind of pseudo-Victorian fantasy memoir. And I loved it. I will say that I almost finished book 2 in February, but I didn't quite make it. So I am also loving book 2, but I can't really talk about it that much in this wrap up because I didn't finish it in the month of February. But if you like any of those things and you are sitting on A Natural History of Dragons, then you should absolutely go and start reading it because it is so good. After that, we have This Tender Land. So this was a book that I read as part of a buddy read with my friend Baron, and we discussed it over on his Discord. And then I had a friend who popped in to my Discord and we chatted about it there as well. So thank you for joining me on that one. But this was a coming of age kind of magical realism. It's historical fiction, but it has that like thread of the fantastic that you would find in books like A Boy's Life by Robert McCammon, which I read last year. So this, I think, was pitched as people who are fans of Stephen King's work, fans of Robert McCammon's work, and it is a historical fiction set, I don't remember what, I think it's set during the Depression. Like, it's set during the early 1930s, I believe. And it's about a group of young boys who are living in a residential school. And so most of the people who live there are Native Americans, but there are two young Caucasian boys who are sent to live there because they are orphaned. They don't have anywhere else to go, and so the school decides to take them in. So they are living in this residential school. There are two brothers and their best friend who spend most of the time together, and for reasons, they have to escape this school and run away. So it turns into kind of an homage to like Huckleberry Finn, to that like adventure down the riverside story, but set in the backdrop of the Depression era in the United States. And then there's actually a lot of really thoughtful commentary on residential schools and their impact and how that affects children and how that follows children through their lifetime. There was a lot about cultural identity and feeling cut off from that identity and what that does to a person. And so it was this kind of combination of really like hard-hitting like historical exploration, part adventure story, and then there was this kind of thread of fantasy that kind of was woven in there. I really liked this one. This is another one of the ones that I gave 3.5 stars. I find it difficult to pinpoint what exactly brought that rating down for me. The writing was good. It flowed well. I think this could be a favorite read for a lot of people because it hits those emotional beats really well. It pulled tears from me several times. It does the coming of age part extremely well. And it's just an interesting topic and I think a really important story. But the plotting for me, there were times when I wanted to pick it up and then times where I thought this part is getting a little bit long in the tooth. Like, I don't know how much more of this I need to read. I think there were some scenes that were a little too convenient. There were some plot conveniences that kind of propelled our characters in the way that the narrative wanted them to go. And then the resolution of the story was really quick. So there's a lot of information that comes at you in the last few chapters. And I think that it probably could have been plotted out a little more thoughtfully in terms of that. But on the whole, I am happy that I read it, and I would likely read other books by this author. If you're looking for that historical coming of age and you like that subgenre, then I still think that this is very much worth checking out because I did enjoy reading it. And then, because I already covered The Wisdom of Crowds, the last book that I read for February was a graphic novel. And this was volume 1 of a graphic novel series. Well, I guess it's a graphic novel duology because there's 2. Called Magical Boy. And I picked this up at Chapters because I saw the cover and it looked really intriguing. I am, for anybody who doesn't know this, a huge Sailor Moon fan. Sailor Moon was my gateway into anime. I really like Dragon Ball Z, which is my husband's like ultimate nostalgic favorite anime because I did watch a lot of Dragon Ball Z as a kid as well. But Sailor Moon will just always hold like a special place in my heart. And this comic, I think, is written by someone who loves that subgenre, who either loves Sailor Moon or just loves like the magical girl trope in general. And the main character is a young trans boy. So he comes from a lineage of women who have this magical girl power. And he is struggling to kind of reconcile his gender identity with the fact that he has inherited these powers himself. So it's really sweet. It's very touching. There are some really difficult moments. I think it doesn't sugarcoat the difficulties that young people can go through in situations like this. Even when they have parents who do love them a lot and are really supportive, that understanding can take a little bit of time to come. And so it does show those bumps in the road, but it was just a really heartwarming comic. I liked it. It got 3.5 stars because I think the plot is a little thin. Now, I think its target age range is probably younger than I am. And I'm willing to forgive, a plot that's not super meaty or doesn't always have to like line up. I just thought it was a cool concept. I thought it was really well done. I liked the artwork. I will absolutely pick up volume 2, and I just think it's nice to create or to support creators who are making stories like this. So I really enjoyed it, and like I said, I will absolutely pick up the second volume. But that is it. Those were my reads for February. Like I said, a little bit lighter than the month before, but I am still following the TBR. So for anybody who doesn't remember, the 3 books that were on my TBR for February that I did not talk about today were Stoner and The Doors of Eden and Infinite Jest. I have started all 3 of those books. The Doors of Eden is almost complete, so that one will definitely be on my March wrap up. And Stoner, I'm about a third of the way through, and I'm really enjoying both of them. So we'll absolutely be looking forward to talking about those in March. Infinite Jest, I just didn't manage to get very far with at all. I read the introduction and I read the first chapter, but I am going to be vlogging that one. So even if I don't get to talk about it a lot, or if it takes a couple of months for me to get through it, then I will have documented the process, and hopefully it will be entertaining enough to watch. Even if you don't read those kinds of books, I know most people are fantasy readers who follow along, but it's such an interesting book that I think it will be fun to talk about regardless. And that's it. That was my February roundup. Those are the books that I read in the month of February. I would love to hear from you, know what your favorite books were for February. If you have that Joe Abercrombie information for me, then I would love to have that as well. And I will see you with another video soon. Bye.